Um, There we go. Cool. So I don't have a major exciting theme or topic for today. It's been several months since we've gotten together in one Zoom room. And before we got too far into summer and moved into yet another season, I wanted to make sure we pulled everyone together just to kind of say hi, see some faces, see how everyone's doing. Now that it's summer and the world is opening up a little bit and restrictions seem to be shifting and changing, just to kind of see how everyone's feeling and doing. And before we jump in, I do want to just kind of put a general call out. If anyone here or you know of someone who couldn't make it in today might be willing to kind of step in and kind of host in the way that I've been, I'm kind of looking for another couple of people because it's been a number of months and it's totally been my fault with my schedule, work and personal, that's kept me from being able to do these every month. I'd love to get it to a point where we're monthly. So if anyone was interested to kind of host, we could talk about that and maybe keep it going monthly when maybe I can't make it. So it's not just on my schedule. We can all keep talking. So that is my intro for today. How is everybody doing? Lots of thumbs up. Awesome. Is everybody currently working or is anyone getting any time off this summer?
In between.
In between.
I've been on, I like to call it the show from hell, but we actually went 6 weeks over, and then our actress got a very, very bad thing of shingles. So we went down for a month, and then we come back up in August. It's just like the show that just won't end.
Yeah.
I mean, something reassuring about it is that I get PCR 3 times a week and I get rapid 5 times a week. So that's always good because even people who are vaccinated are coming down positive. So, part of the crew disappears, then they're back, then they disappear, then they're back, and everybody seems to be vaccinated. So it's tough. But Sean, as you put on New York script supervisor, think this whole thing about vans, my guys have been fabulous. I mean, I actually get my own van to and from work, and I don't know how I got that. I have no clue how I got it, but I got it. And that's for location. It's not for when we're at studio. A studio, they give me a stipend to do a car.
Yeah, Deirdre, that whole thing, I think I was a little misunderstood and I decided not to let it continue. Our show does have vans and it limits the number of people in them. My issue with it was that we were on location that day, but they were transporting people from the studio to the location.
Oh.
My issue was that they didn't do the health check before we got in the van with other people.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, that's what was so bizarre to me. And so I just said, well, then let me have my own van because I want to, until I turn over the accountability, and then we're all personally responsible for our own safety and so on, but there are rules that are in place. And I just thought it was odd, that's the way they did it. And so I got my own van for that day and it was fine. And, but this is a production that I also had to remind them that we can't have 6 people with chairs with their arms right next to each other, all around, tiny 6-inch monitors. So, that's the kind of show I'm dealing with.
Well, I also think that I've been very fortunate in that the show that I'm on is, I'm sure everybody knows, is Ben Stiller's show. And not only does he's so neurotic about people around him and his space and, kind of like a baby Scorsese, but he's got a monitor, his DP has a monitor, and I have a monitor. And when makeup, wardrobe, they all come to stand around me, I'm like, sorry, guys, go stand around Ben or Jessica if you want to. Don't you? Which of course they're not going to do. But I even though it's a hard show, it's very, very hard. There's a lot of benefits that I see to it. And I'm very fortunate to have my own monitor, and I totally get it. And I just don't let people share it with me. It's like, you're not breathing over my shoulder. I don't care.
And we are still dealing with this. We got sent home on Thursday this week because a background person tested positive. And that was a really interesting thing because we've already been shut down because our number one was feeling ill one day. Well, it's because he's in every single scene and he's run ragged. So we've had those kinds of things. But when they shut us down, I don't know if anybody's experienced this, but I got contact traced. I had to do this 40-minute survey with a nurse, asking me all kinds of questions, and she told me that I was now on a health hold and that I probably would not be able to go to work the next day, Friday. And I said, well, first off, you're a nurse, so I understand that you're probably more of a gatekeeper and not an authority. So I will have to talk to my COVID officer. And this was all, I don't know, like at 7 o'clock at night when they finally were doing this. And I called her. She actually had called me in the middle of it. I called her back and I said, so am I working tomorrow? She said, well, you're on a hold. I said, well, let me just say to you that if I am not able to go to work, you can't have anybody taking notes. Not a producer, not a PA, not camera crew, nobody. So I'm the only person in my department, and you are not going to be able to get somebody to get tested today to come in for call tomorrow morning. So if the crew is working tomorrow and I'm not there, I'm going to have an issue with it because I'm going to have a hard time believing that these producers would not attempt to try to get notes taken without somebody there. And so I finally got a text at for a totally different reason at 9 o'clock, and because they're not distributing my breakdowns. This is how like loosey goosey the show is that they've had for a week, and I said, well, while I'm answering the question and just forwarding you the breakdowns that I did last week, are we working tomorrow? Can you hold on for a minute? I mean, it was just like that kind of thing. And we were working the next day, but it's maddening. It's maddening how different shows treat different things.
Yes, totally. I nearly had that. And Rachel, I don't mean to interrupt, but I got to the bus for location early one day. And they said, you want to go on it? And I said, I got to tell you, it's background and there's only like 6 people on it. So I said, are they zone A? They said, yeah, they're zone A. I said, okay, one of the background, sure. And I mean, I got tested. I was negative. All of a sudden they said, Deirdre, go to the tent. I'm like, what do I got to go to the tent for? Well, someone on the bus tested positive, even though they're vaccinated. So I'm sitting here like, you got to be kidding me. Very beginning of this show, though, and as it turned out, they tested him 3 times and it was fine. I went back to work. But our DIT guy, the video village that he has is programmed somewhere from somewhere. So early on, when I said to my producers, what happens if I get COVID? They said, oh, well, you know, this video link works from home, so you can work from home. Which blew my mind, but I was like, okay, but I'm still going to put in when the van would be, if this ever happened, what the van would be in my travel and my out. I said, I'm not starting a crew call, you know, but I had that with the bus. It was maddening, Sean. I understand the frustration.
Has anyone shows, I mean, I'm off a show now, I'm in between, but towards the end of mine, like almost every week we had restrictions being lifted and things were getting looser and freer. Has anyone else encountered that?
Yeah, I'd say I have. I'd say things for some of them have started a little loose, then they've gotten strict, and then they've kind of lifted them as we've gotten towards the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
But they've all been different. I've had one show where I had my own van the whole time. I've had another show where there's like 4 people to a van, but everybody had to wear face shields to be able to enter the van. And it was on another show where you could have 3 people to a van, but no face shields. So I don't know.
You know, I left. I was not doing the last episode, and the week after I left, I started seeing pictures being posted of the crew on set with no face masks, no PPE at all. And I was like, wow, they just really went for it.
Yeah, that was the thing. They took away the face shields towards the end of that production in terms of like having to have them, you know, around the actors was one of the changes they made in the last like week or two.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Alex, with rules being or policies being lax or loosening and then tightening up, are these a matter of policy or just socially people are kind of relaxing
No,
themselves?
the policy changed, like
Okay.
the production. It was, yeah. I mean, I would say the people in the department were pretty good about hounding everybody to stick to them, but once they were relaxed, then it was gone.
That was the same experience in mine, that the COVID department was making the choice to be like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. Okay, we're not doing this anymore. Okay, you guys are cool.
Oh, not my COVID department. They were still, if I brought my masks down, I got, lectured for a half hour. It just wasn't worth it.
Mhm.
Has anybody had experience, like have they had Q-Take wireless on their productions? Like the productions I've been on have had like all the costumers, makeup, hair, everybody's got a wireless image, and so they're not behind me. They're wherever they need to be safely away from me. Has that been a lot of people's experience?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the only problem we encountered with us is we had an actress with dark hair, and they often dressed her in black. And the hair department would always come to me and they're saying, listen, I'm looking at Q-Take, but I can't tell I can't tell if her ponytail's in front of her shoulder or behind her back because it's so dark.
Wow.
So it presented a fair number of problems, but we
Yeah.
were all spaced out. Yeah.
Yeah, the signal's not the greatest.
Oh no. I used to take screen grabs of every time it was pixelated to be like, hey, check it out. It's fun. Let's see.
Yeah, on my show, I mean, my show ended in mid-April, but yeah, we all had Q-Take. I had my own monitor and my Q-Take, and all the hair and makeup people and everybody else had Q-Take, so we were all separated. But it was funny because with the COVID team, like one day they'd be like really adamant and come around saying, you're too close to each other, 6 feet apart. And then the next day, they didn't say anything if people were standing and talking together in clusters. And it's true. It's just so, it varies so much from show to show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of inconsistency. All right. Any other COVID safety related, anything anyone wants to vent about, share, or tips to pass on? Cool. Okay. We all seem to be settled in to whatever our situation is. Cool. Well, how else is everyone coping with keeping busy now that it seems like a lot of us are working and there's a lot going on? Has anyone settled into anything with better work hours, or is everyone kind of back to the norm, 12 to 14 to?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one of the productions I had, they said, oh, we're going to try to keep it at 10 hours. Didn't happen. I don't think there was a single day where we had a 10-hour day. I think the minimum was generally 12 and definitely went far beyond that.
Mm-hmm. So it feels like, from my experience and what I've been hearing, it's kind of just back to work as normal. We're just wearing masks and testing and dealing with that craziness.
I found it interesting, and I've had this talk with several people, including producers, that everybody was talking about how this put everything in perspective and other quality of life things would be prioritized, things like that. And I hated to be cynical, but I kept thinking, no, it'll go back to the same, because people will, people in power will want to recoup the money they lost, and they won't want to spend the money anymore. In all industries, they'll want to improve their nets to get their profits back, and the pressure will be on. And I've definitely felt that on my show, which has a tiny budget, but they are trying to squeeze every last penny out of everything and will make decisions. Like I had to fight for my own monitor after being, I was sitting 6 feet behind the director who had 2 7-inch monitors on a stand. I couldn't see to do my job. I mean, it was so frustrating. And I was like, why can't we get, and they wouldn't spend the money. It's like, how do you not spend the money in order to get the right product? And I was absolutely humiliated one day at work when I went over to the costumer. Had a wide shot that we were finishing, and I went over to the costumer and said, I think we should put our number one's hat that he was wearing before this. I think we should put it on the coat rack. And he said, he's wearing his hat. I couldn't even tell. I was so humiliated. I was like, this is just awful. And of course, I can't be next to the camera because of COVID. I can't be close like that to see what's happening live. And so I'm getting like goosebumps. Like I was so humiliated that this happened. And I said to the producers, I said, if you want me to just log the shots and just not have anything to do with continuity, fine. But nobody else gets to do it either. And they finally got me my own monitor. It's just crazy. But whatever. I don't think what we've been through over the last year has really fundamentally changed people's minds about turnarounds and alternating and things like that. I just don't think it's changed those behaviors.
I do find that my show has been nitpicking and really every department, questioning anything you put down or anything you ask for, timings, meal penalties, I have my ADs trying to tell me, oh, I called it at 9:30, and it's like, no, you called it at 9:31. Oh, come on, Deirdre, do me a solid. I'm like, hey, you know what I mean? Not doing anybody a solid. Everybody has a thing. These guys are entitled to if you go over. And then having this discussion with the producers, they're like, well, Deirdre, you don't understand the millions that we have to pay for PCR and for the COVID. I said, you have more COVID PAs than you do regular PAs. This is not our problem. So please don't tell me that you're trying to save money on the crew because you went 1 minute over. You're trying to get me to lie. And it's because you have to save because of all your PCR, your this, and your COVID people. I mean, look at the call sheet of all the COVID people on it. I'm like, and that's where I think the biggest complaint is the money that they feel they're doing us the favor by keeping us protected.
Yeah, it's challenging. I'm going to take this and sort of turn this slightly because it's not quite a good smooth transition. I will put that out there. But I was curious, in light of all of this and in light of the fact that we're now fighting for more things that are kind of standard, a lot of talk has been coming up in the last few months about assistant script supervisors and bringing on assistants and all of that. And I was just curious how people felt about that. And really, for me, I always kind of waffle and kind of wonder, what would I use an assistant for? So I'm really curious what people feel about that and how worthwhile it is for us to kind of come together and really push forward for something like this. Anybody?
I think it depends on the show and how demanding that specific show is. Some shows have like constantly 3 cameras going or like lots of stunts or whatever. And I think it depends on the individual show.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I agree, Diane, because the show that I'm on, I've always felt like you, Rachel, what would I use someone for? If they do something, I got to recheck what they do. Okay, but on this show, I had 4 cameras all the time. And if I didn't see the whites of their eyes when we were on location, I didn't know what they were shooting. And definitely, if I had a second or somebody that I would have been able to send them with that camera, or just them flipping between the two cameras. So I only had to watch two cameras doing the actual scenes and the actual action and not be worried, you know, and I constantly had them over the walkie to me. What should I call it? What should I call it? Because I use a walkie all, you know, all the time. So that also to me was, I mean, this is the first show that, and as Diane said, it was only this show that I could have figured out something to do to make my load just a little lighter, because my camera reports were always wrong. And the, you know, the seconds just didn't care. They just said, Deirdre, I don't care. And I was like, I'm the wrong person to say that to. But it was extremely difficult on a lot of levels. And I finally saw on this show where I could have used somebody.
But it seems to me in order to gain traction, a strength of an argument would be to how to work this person into all shows.
Right,
You
exactly.
know? And I'm just curious on people's thoughts on how they might see that working. I mean, I understand that's kind of a built-in opportunity possibly for a trainee, or to have someone who knows the show to be your second unit, splinter unit person that you could send out as needed. But on a day-to-day,
I think Sharon has her hand raised.
yes, you do. Sharon, go for it.
Hey guys, I'm working on a show where I've been able to get an additional script supervisor to work with me on main unit. So it's I would say it's a full on script supervisor. You know, it's someone in the union. It's a qualified script supervisor, but I'm bringing them in particularly to help me on specific days that I have sort of seen in the schedule that are going to be really heavy. So that's to do with like heavy page counts and like multiple cameras. I'm also working on a show where we're doing the 10 hours without breaking for lunch, you know, so as soon as we, you know, roll our first shot of the day, like we're just working super fast until we wrap, you know, so there's no sort of like that lunch break that kind of alleviates the sort of burden, you know, where you kind of get to catch up, you know, so it, you know, there was definitely situations where you know, we would still do a film break though. Like there would still be a moment in the day where, you know, camera and sound would break, you know, and then like they couldn't send the break until I had done the camera reports, but there's like 4 cameras, you know, and like we were doing complicated VFX stuff, you know, which needed my full attention. You know, I can really sort of sit down to sort of like do my notes. That would all mostly sort of happen at the end of the day, you know, so you know, after this happened a couple of times, you know, I kind of sort of went to production and basically asked for help. You know, I kind of was able to sort of get someone in and was able to identify like certain days where that would be beneficial to me. And the main thing that I got them to do was to do the camera reports and to line my script. Like I completely passed off that entire task to them, you know, because I would be going home and do like 2 hours of work, sometimes 3, sometimes like a little bit more than 3, you know, so it's kind of like, so even though we're doing like really short shoot days, like I would still be doing like a sort of 13, 14 hour day, you know, and then the next day, like, you know, we would have scenes where we did a really big scene that was like 10 and 4/8 of a page. Oh, the other thing that was sort of like hard about it was that you know, with the pitch, there was a, you know, I think there was like 6 speaking parts, but it was kind of like a sort of comedic sort of screwball scene, you know, so the pace of that was extremely fast. Like we would do scenes that were 8 and 1/8 of a page, and it would come in at like 3 minutes and 50. So each page was like 30 seconds, you know. Like I'm sure you have that a lot on Marvel, you know, where like the dialogue is like moving at a fast clip, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of like, you know, at a certain point, I was just like, I can't even be on book with the actors. I mean, they kind of knew their dialogue, but it's kind of like occasionally there'd be a question and I wouldn't be able to support them, so she was there to sort of like be on book, be that dialogue support, and then sort of like line the script as well, so that at the end of the day, like instead of working 3 hours or more, I would be doing sort of like hopefully less than 2, so that was a way that I figured out what was useful to me, which was to sort of help at the end of the day to sort of like cut that time down. But like of course there was resistance, and there was 2 sort of questions that UPM sort of asked me, which I thought were pretty funny. Like, one of them was, is there any chance that she could break for lunch? Because like obviously like where we have like 8 to 9 meal penalties at prevailing rate every day. It's like, is there any chance that she could break for lunch? And I was like, not unless that there's a definite half hour where we don't have to watch anything, and then they sort of that was the answer. Then they sort of walked away, and then they sort of came back and sort of said, so what happens with this like camera bump, like with the 3 cameras, like? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm watching, like 4 cameras. She's watching 4 cameras because she's lining for 4 cameras. So we're both like watching 4 cameras. So she needs to get the bump too, and then again, they sort of like walked away, So I just thought that was like kind of funny. Like, there's no, I mean, I've heard like conversations, because there's been a lot of sort of conversations about sort of assistants or additionals and that kind of thing, and then I know that LA, for example, there's been some anecdotal evidence, where somebody has sort of said, oh, I brought in an assistant, someone to assist me. I mean, the big difference between East Coast and West Coast is that sort of like they actually have different rates for script supervisors. Like, they have like a 1st-year rate, a 2nd-year rate, 3rd-year rate, so they were kind of sort of trying to find a way where like, how about we bring in an additional script supervisor and they're on the 1st-year rate, and then they get none of the camera bumps, none of the extra stuff, and I was just like, well, that's not really cool, because we fought to get those contractual rights, and just because they're coming in to assist us doesn't mean that we should just waive them and let them go again, so I didn't really sort of think that was a really good way to sort of deal with it, but yeah, at the end of the day, like, that person got like all the camera bumps and all that kind of stuff, and then yeah, like every time I sort of see in the schedule like a day that sort of like comes up, I go to the UPM and sort of like asked to bring someone in. I don't abuse it though. There's definitely days where I see that we're doing 4 cameras, but I know that I can manage that day because it's not dialogue stuff and it's just one actor, so I wouldn't bring them in just because of that, because I totally understand like their point of view, so I'm only sort of bringing them on very particular situations, so far, I think we've shot like 42 days. I've managed to bring that person in, I would say like maybe sort of like 6 or 7 days so far out of that.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to mention is that every day that person has come in, I'm sort of cross-boarding a job right now. It's like 6 different episodes. So far they've actually been from different episodes, so I want that person to be prepared, it's like, I don't want that person to come in when we're supervising a 10 and a 4/8 page of a day and sort of like not know what's going on. So I've also managed to get them, just like a day to read the script, so that they're sort of like fully oriented, when they sort of come to the job. And then there was actually sort of one day where we did actually have a 2nd unit, and they, came in to sort of supervise that, and I was actually really surprised because I went to the UPM and said like, just want to make sure it's okay that she gets that usual 1 hour to sort of like, read the materials, because it was actually sort of like, part of a stunt sequence that we hadn't shot the main unit stuff. So she was sort of supervising all the sort of like stunt stuff first, and we still haven't shot that sequence yet. So there was like storyboards involved. There was actually like a previs involved, so you know, it's just like at the very least, she should take, even though there's no dialogue, that obviously you still have to take in all of that. And then I was actually surprised because the UPM sort of said, oh, actually we had a day set aside for prep for that. And I was just like, well, that's even better, you know. So you know, I think you know, like I think most UPMs are reasonable, you know, and it's kind of like if you kind of sort of present something in a reasonable way, you know, and if they give a little and you don't abuse it, you know, I think you can sort of like, you know, find some sort of like mutual ground, you know, where, you know, they obviously want things to go well too, you know. So always ask.
Given your experience, Sharon, you know, it sounds like you had started the job and realized upon getting into it that you needed the assistance. Do you have any thoughts on starting a job, like you just get hired on something and introducing that concept up front? Do you feel that you need, you know, do you feel like you need those few days to be able to point to be like, hey, listen, this was overwhelming, or do you feel like you could head that off?
For sure. I mean, I kind of, you know, it's kind of like I've cross-bordered a lot, you know, so I feel like I'm sort of very prepared, you know, for what's going to happen in those situations. You know, the AD has cross-bordered a lot, you know, so it's kind of like, you know, we're as prepared as we can be. You know, I was able to do my prep like months in advance, you know, but nothing can really sort of prepare you for every job. Every job is different. And you know, it's funny because we actually did a pre-shoot day, I would say like maybe like 6 weeks before the main photography, and it was exterior in the woods. It was like raining all day, and it was just so manic and crazy, you know. And we all sort of, you know, it was one of those things where because it was a pre-shoot, we didn't even have most of our crew, you know, because they were already on other jobs and weren't available, you know. So when we sort of started the main shoot, you know, we sort of talked about the pre-shoot day because we still had to, you know, we didn't make our day that day and we still have to do pickups for that pre-shoot day. And we sort of, you know, everybody sort of like referred to it as just that awful pre-shoot day, you know, that everyone's blocked from their memory. And we were just like, but it was, you know, it was just a pre-shoot day. We didn't have like our department heads, and it was raining, and, you know, we kind of were still figuring things out, you know. So we kind of like passed it off as like a one-off, but the shoot's not going to be like that. Of course, that's how the shoot was like, because that's how the director works, you know. It's just very manic and it's very fast. And you know, I have to say that even though we're doing 10-hour days, many times we do a 9-hour day because he beats that. He just like, you know, is, you know, he has this thing where he wants to do even less than 10 hours, you know. And he's an extremely experienced director. It's just the way that he works. And also, in addition to that, he has Parkinson's, you know, so he can't do like these really long hours anyway. So like he wants to sort of, when he has his focus and he has his concentration, he just wants to go, you know. So it's just like so frenetic and confusing. And like, you know, 1 minute he'll tell me and the AD and the DP one thing, and then like 1 minute later he'll do something completely different, you know. So like you just can't predict that, you know. And then the way we started was that we did sort of 3 weeks on stage, you know. So obviously that's a situation where the DP can sort of light a whole set, and then you have multiple cameras, and you're not really going to be lighting a lot. The director doesn't want to stop for lighting, you know. So that means that we are sort of just like shooting even, you know, without pause at all, you know. So I don't think anyone could have predicted how fast it was going to go, you know. Like we were told that, you know, the writer, like, you know, the writer kind of sort of ran the table read actually, because he enjoys doing that. And he was like, the way that I'm going to read the scene description, the way it's going to go, that's how fast it should be, you know. So when we did the table read, like it was like super fast. It was just like, okay, you know, but all of us were like, but it can't be that fast, you know. But then like when we were shooting, it was like ridiculously fast. Like no one can predict, you know, that 8 pages is going to end up like 3 minutes 50, you know. I mean, the timing might be like, oh, it's going to be like 4.5 minutes, but then it's like, it's even shorter than that, you know. So like looking back, you know, it's just like, I from a script supervisor's point of view, like we shot some of the hardest scenes in the entire show in the first 3 weeks, you know. So I don't know, maybe I kind of wasn't sort of like taking that seriously, but it all comes from the director, all comes from top, so I sort of like struggle with a few scenes, but then we had our biggest scene in the entire show, and like when I went to the UPM and the producer, I said like, like this week we are going to shoot, from my perspective, the hardest scene in the entire season, and I really need to bring someone in, and they know that I'm not a sort of person who asks for help at all. Like I kind of usually find a way to sort of like manage that. So they know that if I'm sort of coming to them to ask for something, it's it's pretty serious, so I don't know whether that was a factor too, like if you're always kind of going to the UPM and asking for stuff all the time, like maybe that's a little bit different, but they know that they know that I can be very on top of things, and if I'm not, that's going to be a problem. Then I'm flagging to you and giving you the chance to do something about.
Had you worked with them before, Sharon?
I had worked with the producer before, so I think that was definitely a factor, because there was definitely a Friday night where I think a lot of departments kind of, told the UPM like, we need to have a talk after wrap, and like, I remember sort of like kind of waiting in line almost, as while other departments had their talk with UPM, which I'm sure was all a version of like, this is insane, this is crazy, if the rest of the shoot is going to be like this, like then we need extra support, extra resources, this and this, so I kind of had to take my turn, and I ended up having the same kind of conversation, which they mostly just listened to. It was the UPM, the production supervisor. Of course, they listened, they were sympathetic, they were just kind of, well, we don't have the budget to bring in someone for the entire shoot, and then Monday morning, nothing, like no sort of like follow-up from that. And then this big scene that I described, we were going to shoot over 4 days, on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So kind of like around sort of like, I was kind of sort of like busy, but then sort of like halfway through the day, I kind of sort of realized that kind of like, obviously no one is coming to me with a solution, but like if I start this scene tomorrow and I don't have any help, this is just going to be like a hellish week, so I kind of ended up sort of taking it to the producer, who I have worked before, and I said like, I had this talk with the UPM and the production supervisor, and I sort of made my concerns really clear. We're about to sort of start, this huge scene tomorrow for 4 days. And I really need that person. I really need some help, and I really need that person to be there from the beginning, because the first couple of days we're going to be establishing, and then the next couple of days we're going to be sort of matching, because again, it was like to do with VFX, we had sort of some multiplicity stuff going on, so we have an actor who's playing 2 different roles, so on the first couple of days he's going to be this role, and on the other couple of days, he's going to have to be the other role. So there's a lot of blocking to be matched, and things have to be sort of very precise, so I said like, that person needs to be that, they can't just like come in on like Wednesday or Thursday, like this needs to happen now, so I was able to make him see the urgency of that, and he, to his credit, was the one who sort of like made it happen. He sort of went upstairs and sort of talked to the UPM, and I think basically sort of said, like, I've worked with Sharon before, like she never asked for anything, like we need to find a way, to make this happen, even if it's just the scene, so and then it was a flurry, an emergency situation, like I found someone, and like they were concierge tested, like within 2 hours, and then they were able to sort of start with me, like, and sort of supervise that whole scene for me, and like I said, like lining the script was like a huge thing, because with such a big scene, like, you can't even fit all the lines on one page. So we had like duplicate pages every day because there was just so many lines, so that person was kind of in control of all of that, and then of course I kind of, we did have a discussion of how I line the script versus how she lines the script, because we were also using different programs. And I said, you should use the program what but here's what's missing, because there's a lot of line script that's very sort of like minimal, and like I need a lot of notes in my line script, in case we ever go back, like blocking notes and things like that, which, she didn't usually do, so like, so I said, if this, this is your main responsibility. So if you can find a way to include all the things that I usually include in a line script, even if it means going to other programs and sort of like finding out a way, so she was fantastic. Like that's kind of what she did, so I felt safe that I was not, I didn't have to worry about that at all, so I would just say, like Deirdre or anybody, especially on these like big jobs, these big cross-boarding jobs, it's just like, start thinking about what you might use someone for, and how you can sort of delegate the work, and if it gets to the point where you need to have that kind of conversation with UPM or producer, you're really prepared. Like I did a whole thing where I kind of sort of analyzed like all my wrap time from the first 2 weeks, and so I could present them with information. I said, well, I'm doing 2 hours here, I'm doing 2.5 hours, I'm doing 3 hours, and it's just kind of like, this is ridiculous, like this is not sustainable, so I kind of I kind of sort of prepared my arguments, so to speak, but really to answer your question, Alex, I think sort of having a producer on your side is definitely a huge part of that.
Yeah, I think having the reputation and that relationship built probably helped. They probably knew that, you don't cry wolf over everything, that when you say something, it means something. But I think the things that you ended up, having your additional script supervisor do, lining the script and, doing camera reports, like that sounds amazing. When you're in that kind of hustle and bustle, everything's, and you're not breaking for lunch. That's the show that I just finished. That was the same thing. They said, we're going to do 10-hour days and we're not going to break for lunch. And except that we never did a 10-hour day. It was always longer. And so there's never downtime to catch up on anything. And so my wrap times were always just like 2 hours plus long. And, initially they asked me about it. And like, well, we're not breaking for lunch, and everything just kind of builds up. And like, when am I, supposed to catch up? I'm doing the best I can. It's just going to take time. And, if you want the work done, I'll do it as fast as I can. And if you don't, then I can just stop. And they said, oh, no, do the work. Take as much time as you want. But, it required that explanation. But to have had an additional person to avoid such long wrap would have been awesome. I know that in the committee we discussed assistants versus full on additional script supervisors taking on aspects of the job for big complex shows and scenes. And I mean, do you feel like assistants? Do you think that's a better idea than going with full blown script supervisors that are already in the union? I mean, I think.
I think for the things that I needed help on, it needed to be someone who was a qualified script supervisor, because like an assistant is not allowed to line the script. I was kind of hearing about the Gilded Age, because the script supervisor on that had an assistant, like a continuity PA, basically for a number of weeks towards the end of the shoot. So, and I sort of like know her a little bit. And she was kind of just starting out in the craft, and sort of I know her just from sort of giving her advice and stuff like that. So she got this great opportunity, because she was looking for a shadowing opportunity, and then she's like, well, this is perfect for you. You get to sort of shadow, but also get paid. I mean, get paid a PA rate, but you're going to be very close to observe how things work, and so see how things work. And that script supervisor, the show, that's another cross-boarding job. So that's another huge burden for the script supervisor. But the assistant, is not qualified to do any of that work. Like all she could really do was, kind of like carry the kit around, because that person had a huge kit, so there was a lot of cabling and all that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of grunt work. It was kind of almost like a playback person who has an additional person just to run cable and sort of move the card around and stuff like that. I think the most that she was allowed to do was to be on book with the actors and call out dialogue, because that, I'm surprised, but actually that turns out not to be a union covered task, so that's why it's okay for ADs, stand-ins, or somebody else who's not in the union to do that, so I think that's the most that they could do. But the same thing, that person had a huge amount of paperwork, cross-boarding, but that the PA continuity assistant can't help them with any of that.
Yeah, to change it, you'd have to revise the job duties, which I don't think that we want to do. I don't think we want to take anything away from our craft necessarily and give it to somebody who's going to be paid less. Maybe I'm wrong, but like also creating a new craft, I think that'd be very hard to get done, to actually get that through.
I don't know what the processes of that are, but I think it's interesting that like I said, the West Coast Union, they have different like
levels of first
pay,
year, second year, third
and
year.
then in countries where you do have script supervisors assistants, in the UK and in Canada, there is a separate rate for an assistant script supervisor. So, what I've learned is that this is on our contract, it's just going to be really, really hard because there's only one rate, I mean, there's different contracts, but there really is kind of like only one rate, and to be honest, it's kind of like, even though this was a great situation, and I was able to sort of pass off like a whole bunch of work for her to do, which helped me tremendously, I was still doing 80% of the work. She's doing 20%, maybe 25, 25, 75. But still, it's kind of like, that's not a great situation. If somebody is earning the same rate as you, but only doing a quarter of the work, that's not a fair situation at all, So the only way that I can sort of see this working and being, kind of acceptable is if there is a separate rate, I mean, I will say this, which is maybe just particular to sort of my job, but so I'm working on an HBO job, and as we all know, HBO contract, the rate is a little bit lower than a majors contract. So, but a lot of what happens when I work with HBO is that they will pay the crew the majors rate. So we're actually getting technically above scale. I mean, it's like literally just like a couple of dollars, but they do that because they don't want to lose the crew to a major show, so they match that rate, So when my additional came in, the UPM said like, I don't know if you talked about your deal with I.A.T.S.E, but we have to put her on the HBO rate, because like, we're, like you made a deal for yourself, which, we're honoring, which we honor for anyone who's coming in to do like a second unit or something like that. But, like she's doing a portion of the work, so we're going to put her on the scale rate for HBO, like I said, it's just a couple of dollars, and so that totally made sense to me, but, to me, like the obviously like cost is a major factor, and the fact that we only have like this one rate is not palatable at all, for even if production and UPM totally agree with you that you need help, especially in a situation where we're doing prevailing rate meal penalties, that's another person that they have to pay 8, 9 prevailing rate meal penalties to, which is totally like not, you can totally see their point of view. It's just not doable, so so I'm just sort of putting it out there that it's, I'm sort of very grateful and thankful that I was able to get an assistant, but like I said, it's only for particular days, on a production that obviously supports me and sort of, can see very clearly that I sort of need that help, but to sort of, float the idea of bringing a full-on script supervisor for an entire job at the beginning of a job that you haven't started. Like, I just see that as, pretty
in your mind, to make that a sustainable practice, that you think there should be a lower rate for somebody being brought in to do that? You think that would?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, well, I put it out to you guys. If you had an assistant who was like maybe doing a quarter of your work, would you think it was fair that they were being paid the same amount as you were, but only doing a fraction of the work? Like, to me, that's not a workable model, you know?
Well, I definitely agree that it should be when I think it should be somebody who is fully capable as a script supervisor. And I don't want to bring on somebody who's really just another PA. But I think if they're doing assistant work, like the camera reports and lining the script and things like that, that it should be a lower rate. But I also think that the main script supervisor should be getting a manager additional fee because of having to prep that person. So I do think that there's a little bit of, reducing it for the assistant, but bumping it up when the script supervisor is actually doing some management for that too. But if that assistant, because they're qualified to, became the person who did the tandem units or did the main unit when the main script supervisor was in prep, then that person would get the full rate of this as the script supervisor. And I know that's a little bit of a balancing act, but other departments do those kinds of things too, where when a second AC becomes the first or, that kind of thing, their rate does change according to the role that they have to play. We haven't had that experience because we've always been in a department of one, but the model is there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's kind of like if like when she went to do the second unit, she was, I think she had, I'm not sure actually. I need to check on that, but in terms of the rate, I mean, like I said, it's just a difference of a couple of dollars, but yeah, I think having a sort of different rate is sort of key to that, because like all the other examples, like, if you have like, a second AC that, and then we have a tandem unit, and then the second AC goes to be the first AC on that unit, they're going to be, re-rated, to a first AC rate, because they're doing a different, different responsibilities, so that totally makes sense, but because we don't have that structure, it's kind of like how do we make that possible?
But I also don't think that it's a good model to have somebody who's just a utility, because that, like gathering your gear around and all that stuff, that is just so different from script supervisor to script supervisor that trying to come up with a sellable thing to the studios or producers of what would be universally attractive to the job of bringing somebody on, it's very easy to say, well, then don't have so much equipment.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I think that's what the production people were sort of thinking. Like, it's kind of like, because, other script supervisors would come in to do sort of additional units, and then like, they would just show up with an iPad or something like that. So it's kind of like, it's it doesn't always sort of look good when you have a lot of equipment.
Well, I think that's something that we probably need to discuss more in just in terms of how to have this happen. I mean, to get it in the contract, I think is going to be difficult, but not impossible.
Well,
I think also just people asking for it, as you did, and that just becoming more commonplace could start to shift things.
Yeah, I mean, the LA rates, that's based on years of experience. So like I said, they have a first year rate, a second year rate, a third year rate, so that's something that's not based on skills or having to re-describe the job. It's just based on, obviously, someone who just joined the union last year is obviously not going to be as qualified and experienced as someone who's been in the union for 20 years, so that's something that might be worth exploring, where it's just based on how long you've been in the union based on experience, so
I also think we have to be really careful with anything that we do decide, because as we all know, very few production managers or producers come up from production coordinators within the office. A lot of times now it's location managers, and they all try to look so cool to their superiors in how they, and we want to be sure that it's not a battle that we're fighting, of saying, well, why do you want to hire me as this? Well, what about, I think language, and I know it's education of the UPMs, but I also think we really, really need to explore this. I think it's a good idea, but I think we have to be very careful in what we actually decide on.
Yeah, and I do think that it's it's worth sort of asking and exploring that. And I kind of feel that for anyone who's doing a cross-boarding job, like, I think you underestimate how much, clout you have, because it's kind of, when you're just one person carrying this huge burden without any help whatsoever, it's, and you can, I think you can sort of, kind of, I wouldn't say demand, but it's kind of like, there's a genuine sort of like basis for sort of, asking for additional help, because it's kind of like, it's very obvious that you don't have any help, like people always coming up to you and sort of saying like, you don't have any help, like who else is, like you're cross-boarding this whole job, it's like, this is a really difficult job, like it's like everyone can sort of see that it's really difficult. And when you're cross-boarding, it's especially with one director, because you're just shooting it like this, just one huge movie. I think that's the situation you're in too, right, Deirdre? Or maybe a couple of directors, but
well, we only have two, and I'm sorry to cut you off. We only have two directors, but and we fell so far behind that we started having quote unquote tandems, but with the two directors shooting at once. And I was going to stay with Ben. And then Ben came to me and said, I really need you with the other director because she doesn't know the show the way you know it. We got a different DP, so they don't know it. And I was like, so I really had to have the same person that amount of time to me. And my UPMs were great when I said, this is the prep they need. This is this, this is this. And it's all how we, as what you said, Sharon, how we approach it to them, how we say things. Because a production manager told me many, many years ago, present your case and let me decide. So it's all how we present our case to them. And we have to understand what we need to do our job to tell them what we need to do our job. And a couple of times my UPM was like, oh, well, this, the second director is just going to go shoot something and, you don't have to worry about it. And I said, well, if we don't have the same person on, you're not going to have notes. You're not going to have anything for the camera department. And the camera department is always happy to slate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I was like, boys, you just don't do it. You just do not do it if they will not give me someone. And they always gave me someone. But Sharon, it's, I think how we, because my show was so big, I was just like, and the people I used for second unit that came in, the two people said, oh my God, how the hell does she do this? And as I'm doing my job, the key PA is asking me the first shot. Camera's coming up to say, because Ben will never cut the camera. So I had to do time codes also. How many clips do I have? How many? And I was like, boys, get away and shut up. And the two other people were like, oh my God, this is massive, massive.
Yeah, I mean, like just from what you said, it's very clear that Ben really relies on you. And it's kind of like, it's kind of, everyone kind of is relying on this one person. It's like the job I'm doing is like non-linear. So even just reading the script, it's just confusing because it's just jumping back and forth in time all the time, so it's just like making everyone's head explode, so, and everyone can, it's like if everyone can see that people are relying on you, like, and it's kind of like they can't sort of move on to the shot until these questions have been answered. It's just kind of like you have to sort of, you have to use that, you can use that,
And I must say, everybody who has worked with Ben Stiller before said no to this job. So I was like, oh, was I the last person on the list? And of course they all laughed, but the two shows I was supposed to do folded, just the the stars walked away from it. So I was like, oh, I guess I need my pension and welfare hours. I was supposed to be finished at the end of April. So yeah, it's tough. It was just hard with the 10 episodes, the, 4 cameras every day, and the leapfrogging that the DP would do. Yeah, it was, I understand why everybody said no to him.
Yeah, I mean, if you can see that you have a great relationship with the director and they're relying on you a lot, like there's really, the UPMs have to say yes. I mean, the director I'm working with, like he asked for me to be on the Tech Scout, which I haven't been on a Tech Scout in years, and but they can sort of, I mean, part of it is that like a communication is definitely sort of like a challenge on our show, because he does have his speeches affected, and he talks really, really fast, so it's just kind of like, he was just like, I don't want to repeat everything that I said on the Tech Scout to Sharon on set, so she should just be there at the Tech Scout, and it's like, the the UPMs have to make that happen. It's not their decision, it's kind of like if the director needs that support in these areas, and it's like if you see you need support in these areas, and otherwise the work is going to suffer, it's like that's a way to sort of make an argument there.
And the whole thing is speaking up, isn't it? We really, as a group, we have to speak up. We have to speak up, and we have to not think about ourselves, but the next person. If you go through this, I can say, well, if someone else can say, Deirdre and Sharon went through this, yes, there is a precedence, Sean has done it. As long as we know what one another is doing and we support one another, then the UPMs, it's not going to be, well, so-and-so doesn't do it. Well, so-and-so can handle it alone. Well, I don't care what so-and-so does. It's like, you want a good product. I'm fanatical about my work. Let's deal with it. We have to stick up for one another.
I wonder if, as this gets to be more and more common, if it will then become easier to get it into the contract to have, some kind of an assistant position put into the contracts.
Maybe.
Potentially.
But we also have to start thinking about the contract also, because we're getting a new business agent at some point, aren't we?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's kind of going to be like starting from square one. Not that we weren't on square one, but we got to think about this.
Hi, this is Julie Robinson. Hi, Sharon, I know you were involved, was it a couple of years ago, with a Zoom meeting, I think it was, with the British script supervisors. They obviously have a model. Is it something that we could replicate here, do you think?
Yeah, that was a meeting that was just last year, in fact. But it's about rate again. They have a separate rate for an assistant script supervisor, so you bring in someone, from what I understand, each script supervisor that has an assistant script supervisor, they can decide what the assistant is going to do, so like in that, I thought you were there, Julie, but like they also just talked about different ways that they would use their assistant, and some would be helping with the paperwork, and then other people would sort of say, well, no, I do all the paperwork myself, but they go around and do all the camera information and all that other stuff, yeah, they have a different rate, so it's established, there was even like one, like in the panel that I have, like we had an assistant script supervisor and a trainee script supervisor, so they have situations where they have a script supervisor, an assistant script supervisor, and also a trainee script supervisor, so that's like a 3-person job, a 3-person department, so but I think there's a misconception, because it's kind of like people are just like, oh, this is great, they have it all set up, but from talking to them, it sounds like it's also still difficult just to sort of campaign to sort of get someone, and it doesn't always happen. It seems to only happen on big TV jobs, where you usually just have like one person you know, so it doesn't happen on every single job.
So really our stumbling block is the fact that, I mean, their union is very weak, whereas ours is very strong in comparison. So I guess it's the fact that,
Well,
really,
it's nothing to do with the union, like what they have set up, you know. It's in fact, a lot of the script supervisors on that panel, like they weren't in the union. You don't have to be in the union to work on set.
right, but in our industry here, you do.
Yeah.
So the difference being is that they seem to be able to be free to hire whoever they want and not worry whether they're in the union or not, to be able to come in as an assistant. Whereas for us, in effect, I mean, we can't really hire anyone unless they're a fully fledged script supervisor to do any part of our job. Is that right?
Well, we should look to Canada because they actually do have a union assistant position, you know, so maybe that's something we should sort of be talking to the Canadians about.
So that seems to be the way forward, is if we're going to have an assistant, then who's paid, you know, at a comparable rate for what they do in comparison to what a fully fledged script supervisor would do, is that we have to have that role invented and brought into the fold, I would have thought, before we can go any way forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's worth exploring. Like we've talked to a lot of people. We haven't talked to the Canadian locals.
We haven't.
But I do agree with you. I think it's not right that, you know, you're doing 80% of the work and someone else who's a fully fledged script supervisor in the union comes on board and they do 20% and yet they get paid the same rate. I mean, that does not seem right.
Yeah, but it would be the perfect situation for someone who was in the union, but maybe only had a couple experience, you know, and was able to sort of had never been on a big, you know, set before, you know, but was qualified and sort of understood the job, but, you know, just needed to understand more about how things work on bigger shows. You know, there's a lot to be learned from that, you know. I mean, you know, Diane has a whole sort of mentorship program. That's all people that have only been in the union for a couple of years, you know.
Right.
I'm not, go on, Julie.
Board and they get the same rate as you. That doesn't seem right. Irrespective of how many years they, you know, I mean, it just doesn't seem right. If you're doing 80% of the work and they're doing 20%.
Yeah, I think the rate thing is key. That's the only way I'm going to see it happen.
Sorry, Sharon. I'm also not against saying that it could be tied to budget as to whether or not you could bring on somebody, or or the nature of how you're going to shoot, like cross-boarding or something like that might require it. But I would not be against in the tier film saying you can't bring on an assistant unless the production would go along with it, simply because, I don't know, at the smaller budgets, I certainly learned how to do the job better by myself, and would know what I would need an assistant for. But on these much higher budget shows, when things are more complicated and more cameras and stuff like that, yeah, I think that it could be tied to that. It might be an idea.
Alex, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful to, if we were able to identify some common items that come up where we think that this is something that warrants it. Like, yes, you're cross-boarding 4, 5+ episodes, you've got 4, 5+ cameras regularly, then that might be something where I think it would be a lot easier to make that case to bring somebody on. And that if people find themselves on a show where that's the case, they should maybe be saying something. I think that instead of creating a new craft position, I think it would be easier to basically create a separate portion in the contract that makes an allowance for a full-fledged script supervisor to be brought on to perform only certain aspects of the job, as what Sharon was, talking about her experience was. And that might potentially make that easier for, the producers to digest if they're not paying the same rate double. But I think both options are probably worth exploring. We need to continue talking to the committee, and we need to bring it up to the negotiation committee at some point once we've talked through it more. But I think that people that are already in our local, getting them to do parts of the job for an agreed upon rate would probably be an easier thing to push through than creating a new position. But it still needs to be explored.
Sean, didn't you mention that you know a script supervisor who kind of sort of makes it very clear up front that if there's, you know, a certain number of speaking roles and a certain number of cameras?
Yeah.
Additional?
Yes. If there are more than a certain number of speaking roles in a scene, she has it in her deal that an additional is to come on and handle that. And it's also she's built her deal around you know, when things are more complicated. If there are more than a certain number of cameras or more than a certain number of speaking parts in a scene, then yeah, she gets an additional.
So have you been brought on as an additional with her on main unit in that situation?
I've never been brought on, but I was given the full terms of the deal, which is how I know about it. And those things rarely happened, but she knew well enough the scripts that they could happen, and they did. But I never ended up being that person. But I was pretty much the regular alternate on a show that really didn't have an alternate. If that makes sense.
It could
Because
be
I did all the prep days and stuff like that. The main unit for when prep was on.
This is sounding to me like just as we go in when we're making our deals and say, listen, if there's going to be a lot of revisions during prep, I might need to go over my prep time. So I want to just leave the door open if I need to go above and beyond the, you know, allotted prep time, or, you know, so that you just sort of like broach the subject when you're making a deal and say, maybe there won't be a lot of revisions, but if there are, I just want to, you know, put it out there if I need more time. And likewise, maybe we won't do 5 and 6 camera days, but if we do, I just want to, you know, put it out there that maybe I might need an assistant one day. So if we just maybe start mentioning it, you know, when you're negotiating your deal.
I agree, but it's also worth mentioning that you mentioned it. Like, you know, I've run into a lot. I'm on a 6th day every single week on the show that I'm on right now. And they were so adamant about not having an alternate. And I said, but my prep is going to have to go in, and it will always have to be on a 6th day. And they didn't like that and so on. But I had to remind them, as we've been getting revisions, and they asked me, oh, so when are we going to get a timing for such a, and I'm like, well, my 6th day is coming up, and I'm sorry that it's only going to be 2 days before we start shooting the next episode, but you didn't want to pay OT or have somebody alternate. So this is the way this is the way that we're going to have to handle it. And we talked about that in the beginning. And I also raised the concern that if we had somebody else that could take on that role, it would be easier. But they didn't want it. And I do bring it up, but I don't bring it up in a mean way, but I have to say, you know, if you wanted this, there was a solution. And I think moving forward, it would be better for everybody. But this, you can't say it's a surprise. Basically is how that goes. So it is worth mentioning and trying to get deals, but yeah, just keep knowing what the results of if it doesn't happen.
No, the key sounds to be it's a lot of communication. It's communicating up front, it's communicating as you're going along. And honestly, and a big part of why I started these is communicating amongst ourselves. The more we know about what everyone else is doing and the more we talk to one another, I feel like the better chance we have of kind of gelling and kind of finding whatever that ground is to help push it forward and make this into something possibly in the contract. That being said, we're significantly over that hour mark. I want to be cognizant and aware of everyone's time on the weekends, especially those of you who are working. So I figured I'd take these last couple moments if anyone else had anything else they want to jump in and share.
Actually, Rachel, I just wanted to ask you about when, like, did you work on Maisel the year where they did have an assistant script supervisor? So the work.
I did not know. That was season 1. I came in on season 2.
Okay, I was just curious whether I heard that that person just did dialogue support, but I was curious to know whether they did anything more than that.
I don't know. I'd heard different stories about how that shook out. The last I'd heard was that they kind of alternated. So one of them would take the even episode and focus on dialogue while the other did continuity and the rest, and they would take turns. But I never had a long conversation with either one of those people to really suss it out.
But they had like 2 script supervisors on.
In season 1, partway through, they brought on a second script supervisor, is my understanding, and that is how I was told they shared the work when I went in for an interview. As of season 2, they have Stacey and I alternate episodes or blocks. It's a little weird, our rotation, but they ultimately decided to bring in a, what do they call her? They call her a dialogue tracker, which is basically a glorified PA, but whose only role is to sit with the script and run lines with the actors and provide support for the actors more so than, tracking the scene, if that makes sense.
All right, got it.
Rachel, I have a question for you you said that they do blocks. Does that mean they're cross-boarding like 2 episodes at a time?
Sometimes it's been very uneven. We have some episodes that are just single episodes, some that we do is 2. This year they did 3 together. Sometimes it's 3 and then 2 and then 1. It's every season that I've been with them, it's been a little bit of a different. So instead of odds and evens, we're kind of first rotation, second rotation, and they sort of tell us what those will be.
Okay, and I might want to talk to you about this later because City on the Hill on our season 3, they've only invited me back.
Okay.
They haven't invited the alternate, and they said they don't want an alternate situation this time because they're going to be doing blocks of 2 episodes a piece, and but I still think that can offer an alternate situation, but who I was alternating with did not want to have like that 20 days off,
Yeah.
And I was just curious, is that how that's working?
That is the challenge of it. I'll be honest, every season of Maisel has been a different timeline structure for us. We've just done 3. There have been times where I've had a whole month and a half down between my turns on set.
Right.
Other times where we've had 7 days and the next person's up. And then other times where they've decided to cross-board 2 episodes, like 4 and 5, but for whatever reason, Stacey would do 4 and I would do 5. So we would come in and out all the different days, depending on what work was scheduled.
Right.
It's very unusual. I've never worked quite like
and
that.
We did that last year, the coming back after COVID, we alternated that way, but we also cross-boarded kind of, we did. And we both were there a lot some days, but we rarely ever had OT, either one of us.
Right.
Because of the way that we could actually schedule it. So I don't want to take up more time with this because I know people have to go and I have to go prep myself, but I'd love to talk to you about how you do this.
Yeah, sure. Anytime.
Yeah.
So Rachel, I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
I've been receiving emails on a Blue Cross Blue Shield settlement notice. Is that something that anyone else has received?
Yes, actually, I just filled it in yesterday. It's funny because I thought about sending out an email, to the network and saying, has anyone done this? Is it a scam? But I did it and it seemed legit. I didn't have to give out any personal info apart from my address.
But isn't this a group effort because it's all through the union?
It's through Blue Cross Blue Shield, so that I think that involves people other than just our union.
But I mean, I would have thought because we don't deal directly with them. It's via, MPI.
No, MPI doesn't do it because California on their 871 blog, they all had these questions about 6 months ago and they all wondered about it like you did. And like Sharon, certain people started doing it. No, MPHI is not sending anything out. It's Blue Cross Blue Shield.
So then it says at the end, this settlement may affect your rights. So how do we stand with all of that?
I don't know. I'm with Oxford.
I don't know. I mean, it's not the first time that I've received something like that, you know. I just decided to read it this time and be like, you know, I mean, I don't know what the payout is going to be. Maybe it'll just be $10, you know, but I was like, you know, it didn't ask for, you know, social security or bank details, anything like, you know, it gave you the option to get paid by Venmo or PayPal. So it seemed like low impact to me. So I don't know whether I'll get anything of it, but it, you know, I mean, I've ignored them in the past, you know.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I have to say, years ago, before I got into the union and I had a different insurance company, I received something like that about some kind of class action settlement for, you know, the way they were charging or not reimbursing or whatever. And so I filled it out and forgot about it. And a few years later, I actually got a check from that insurance company for maybe like, I don't know, several $100, $1,000, something like that. I can't remember what it was now because it was a long time ago, but it did pay out, pay off. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I do them all the time. I've been doing them for years because you never know how much it's going to be.
And have you received anything, Sean?
I always have. The first one I ever did was from Kodak back in the 80s. And when I got my $25, I went, I guess that was real. And I get them and I've had the lowest one I ever had was like 52 cents for something. And I can't even remember what it was for, but because the lawyers really make the most amount of money. But I've done it on cars. I got one from Honda. I definitely filled out this one for the Blue Cross Blue Shield because, you know, it's worth it.
Oh, I'll give it a go. Thank you.
Yeah. I just did another one from Drizzly. Do you know what Drizzly is? That app to deliver, alcohol, wine, and some of that. Just got one of those, filled it out. It's like, I'll take my $5. I don't care.
Funny.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Going back to Canada and their assistance, Sharon, I think it would be great if we had something like your across the pond Zoom meeting with the UK script supervisors. Maybe we should try to do an across the border.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm working full time, so I can do it, but all you guys who are maybe between jobs, maybe you should look into it. I do know there's, Daniela Sioni, who, you know, like she's the one who pipes up a lot on the Facebook group, you know, so she's like, I've sort of corresponded with her sort of on other things, you know, but she would be a great person to get in touch with, you know, if you guys, if you wanted to do it, Diane, maybe look into that. I don't know when your next job is coming up, but
I think that we should probably talk to Doug Rothstein since he's in the Canadian Union.
Yeah, I think Doug and Daniela know each other quite well.
That's a good idea. Yeah, because then once we have that, you know, the information from the UK, the information from Canada, and then what they're doing in 871, it might be just more information to sort this all out.
It's definitely worth keep talking about it. All right. I guess on that note, I see people are signing off to do their prep and their lives and everything. So again, thank you, everybody. It was lovely seeing everyone. I'm going to strive to do this monthly again so we can kind of keep this up. And if anyone out there is willing to step in and kind of be the host here and there, so we can keep it up monthly rather, reach out. I'd love to talk further.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Rachel.
if I'm not working, I would say that I am. So yes.
Awesome. Great.
Good to
You
see
can
everybody.
get the office to send out an email, you know.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I just figured I'd broach the subject here first with those in attendance. So great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Sharon, for all your insight. And I guess we will. I'll speak soon.
Have a good weekend.
I know.
Enjoy, guys. Take care.